Hi, my name is John Brink. Thank you for joining us today in watching a history of the BC forest industry. Our guest today is a very interesting guest. It is Bob Simpson, the mayor of Quesnel. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Thanks for having me on, John.
Bob, are you originally from BC or the Northern Interior?
No, I'm actually a Scottish immigrant. My folks immigrated from Glasgow, Scotland, to Winnipeg, Manitoba in 1967. My folks were kind of getting out of the British factor system where you couldn't move up in their housing scheme regardless of what money you had in your pocket. So my dad said, forget it, pulled the plug and moved us all to Canada in 67.
And so then where did you go? Did you go to BC or where did you land?
Oh, my family stayed in Winnipeg for quite some time. I was 10 when we came over, but I got advanced in the education system and was actually in grade 12 when I was 15. And I had a falling out with my dad. We were both pretty strong personalities. Left home when I was 15, graduated from high school, worked for a bit, and then the minute I turned 17, faked his signature on my application to the Navy and joined the Navy. And that's what brought me out to British Columbia. I was posted to a ship in Esquimalt and ended up falling in love with British Columbia and have been here ever since.
And then, so you, where was how long were you with the Navy?
I only was there for 2 years because I was supposed to go into the officer training when I turned 19. But that was during the time that the former Trudeau had standardized the entire military. So we actually did a wave the flag tour, first time ever a non-American force had been in Japan post-World War II. And we were going ashore in green uniforms, not the regular Navy uniforms. So the morale was really, really low. And by the time I was 19, I had an out and took it. As opposed to going into officer training, I also had the opportunity to leave, and I did.
Yeah, and then somehow you went to BC, to UBC, or
Yeah,
did,
I ended up going to UVic, and I did a whole bunch more traveling. I didn't actually end up in UVic until I was 25, and then I did 2 degrees at UVic back to back. I did a history degree and then a science degree, and then ended up getting my teaching certificate. And in between my science degree and teaching certificate, I met my wife, who happened to be from Quesnel, and that's what the Quesnel connection was.
oh,
Up here in 85, we both got teaching positions here in 85, and we've been here. I thought I'd last 2 years because I was a big city boy, and it drove me crazy when I would walk downtown and everybody knew me. That gave me the creeps. And I ended up, we've been here for 35 years, love it, and wouldn't live anywhere else.
yeah, yeah. Quesnel is such a beautiful, beautiful city and close to my heart because it's the first place that I worked. I spent a month there, but it always has been close to me. And the first job that I got was in Canada, was in Quesnel. The So you were in the teaching profession for a number of years.
Yeah, I lasted 7 years. I came out once the profession was unionized. I really struggled with taking what I consider to be a profession and turning it into a union. And I think it's proved out over the years that union part of it really undermines what the system could do. But during that 7 years, I was the science department head. I was a biology and chemistry teacher, but it was where I blended into BC Forestry because almost the first couple of months that I landed in Quesnel, I was handed a curriculum for a grade 11 forestry program. The teacher had moved into the vice principal's position, and he said, this is part of your schedule now. So over that 7-year period, I took that rough Forestry 11 program and turned it into a Forestry 11 and 12 program. And that's what immersed me in the industry from the ground up, if you will, but from that curriculum development perspective.
But you really had no experience in the industry at all.
No, I had worked one summer as a tree planter, almost killed myself doing that. And I had worked a short stint as a dryer off bearer in a plywood plant, but my dad got me a job at the mine he was working at. It paid more and it was a lot easier work than a dryer off bearer. So,
Yeah. So then you got deeper involved in the forest industry because you left the teaching and then you ended up at Wellwood.
yeah, I came out of teaching and had established my own consulting business. I did community development, economic development, did quite a bit of work in change management. And as a consequence of that, got a contract with Wellwood when they were building a brand new mill designed for the Japanese market. It was going to be kiln-dried, metric, Douglas fir product, a really challenging market for them to get into. And they were converting their 4x8 plywood plant to a 3x6 plant, again, for the Japanese market. The contract I did for them, they liked, I did all the human resource part, the team development for that. So they asked me to join them and I worked for Wellwood in that kind of field of organizational change for 10 years.
Yeah. And then, then also during that period, Wes Fraser acquired Wellwood. And again, for Wes Fraser, again, a unique company close to Quesnel. I mean, close from a historic perspective of Wes Fraser, because it were Sam, Bill, and Pete Ketchum that acquired the 2-mile planer in, I believe it was 1956. And started from there a company that over the 60 years would become the major manufacturing of lumber company in North America.
Yeah, and in fact, it is our only major employer now in Quesnel. So in my experience with Wellwood, I lived through the forest practices code from government, the results-based code from government, and then the consolidation opportunities that were made available. So I was originally part of Wellwood when Champion International owned Wellwood, then International Paper bought them, and then Wes Fraser bought them specifically because they also got access to their tree farm licenses and their forest licenses. So that internal experience of being an employee of a company with the consolidation and the changes to how we manage the land base was pretty formative for me during that time with Wellwood.
Yeah, and then the other thing that happened was also unique again to an individual like yourself, is that in the late 90s, the initial indications, early 2000, late 90s, there were initial indications of a pine beetle attack in the Tweedsmuir Park around the Burns Lake area that had major concerns to a lot of people in the industry. And what happened there is that because it was a park, it could really not be addressed in the park. But it spread rapidly from there for the next 15, 20 years. And it changed, for all intents and purposes, the forest industry in the interior of the province of British Columbia.
Yeah, so I was with Wellwood at the time that this was evolving, as you say, that very late 1990s into the early 2000s. I was severed from Wes Fraser as part of the takeover in early 2005 before I was elected to the NDP. But yes, Tweedsmuir was certainly one area it came from, but in the Quesnel timber supply area, just to the south of us in Horsefly, there was another big hot spot. And you can track about a half a dozen of these big hot spots. And in industry, I kept asking our foresters, because you could start to see the data, why aren't we going after that? And part of the story of the mountain pine beetle is everybody knew you couldn't control it through management. You had to control it through nature with a massive long-term cold. So everybody was just waiting for that one winter when you got that cold knocking it back, and it never came. So 2002 on, we saw the data and we knew we had something we'd never experienced before.
No, what they were looking for is 40 below for about 2 weeks in October, and that doesn't happen anymore. We
Right.
know in the 60s maybe, but not anymore now.
Yeah.
Uh, so the other thing that happened during all that period, you started to get more involved in politics,
Yeah.
and you ran for your for MLA. When what year was that?
That was 2005, but part of the transition to politics, I had been involved in politics with Gordon Campbell's takeover of the Liberal Party in the mid 1990s into sort of the early 2000s. And I got pretty jaundiced about party politics and the power and the money involved in that. But as a change management person and as a leadership coach, you keep asking the questions of how do we resolve these big complex problems? How do we deal with some of these issues? And I kept coming back to governance. It's governance decisions. We need to have better policy, better decision making. So that kind of pulled me back into politics. And at that point in 2005, I joined the NDP and ran successfully as the NDP candidate for Cariboo North.
And you were a member of Parliament really for 8 years. Part of that was as an independent.
Yeah, I did 8 years with the NDP, but post the 2009 election, I mean, the political party system beats you down. There's lots of controls. You're always supposed to put the party ahead of anything else. So it really negates you asking some of the tougher questions. And when you're a newbie, all of the people who have experience keep saying, well, you just don't know what you don't know. Well, after the 2009 election, with 4 years under my belt, I knew enough to start pushing back. And so by 2010, they'd had enough of me, and I got ejected from the NDP, and I spent my last years as an independent in the legislature.
Yeah, and so that was up to 2013.
Yeah, and I ran as an independent in the 2013 election and came very close on a three-way split to winning the seat as an independent. But that was at the time when people thought there was going to be an NDP government, and it was a pretty heavy swing in the interior back to the Liberals. And I got caught up on that. I had lots of people phone me afterwards saying if we knew it was another Liberal majority, we would have never voted for them, but it was too late by then.
Right. And then from there on in, when you were not elected, you went back into consulting.
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, I actually sailed a lot for a couple of months. I had a sailboat for the longest time down south and sort of reset, got back into consulting. But the fall of 2013, we had a Canfor mill closure. So going through that again as a community. And the mayor at the time said on an interview, you know, my hope is that Christy Clark's LNG strategy will save the community because we were surprised by this mill closure. And I went, that's just nonsensical. I love this community. I'm vested. I want to stay here. So I decided to run for the mayor's position and won the mayor's position against that same mayor in 2014.
Yeah, and that was Wallace?
No, it was Mary Schustrom. And I actually, it was the first time a mayor had ever won more votes than the top councillor, because of course councillors don't split the vote. They have all of the vote available to them, whereas a multi-mayor candidate, you split. But I got a 72% mandate, which kind of suggested to both the former mayor and the council, which was an incumbent council, people wanted something very different. And that's what we've been trying to do since then.
Now, the thing that also happened is that, you know, when Canfor closed the mill, it was really a result of a trade that happened between Wes Fraser and Canfor, where they switched their timber holdings in one region over the other, right?
Yeah, and in fact, you know, Steve Thompson was the forest minister, and Steve and I had developed a very strong relationship in the legislature, especially when I sat as an independent, because of my background, I could help him make some sense out of what some of the advice he was given. So we did have a good relationship. And I phoned Steve about that deal between Canfor and Wes Fraser and said, what the heck? both communities losing mills, the wood changing hands. It would have been nice to get a heads up. And Steve's comment was, yeah, I agree. It would have been, because he never got a heads up either. And that's a legacy of that consolidation, framework that Campbell had provided to the industry in 2003, that they didn't have to engage the minister. They could just trade them as if they were commodities, which is exactly what happened.
That's really when there was a major change under their program, the revitalization of the industry in 2003, when the BC Liberals came into power. But basically a number of things changed. The interpretation of appurtency, which meant that timber harvested in a particular region community should be processed in that region. That notion disappeared, or the social contract, if you wish. The other one was that small business program that set aside timber for secondary manufacturers. That went back to the BC timber supply area, and it disappeared from the secondary manufacturers and kind of set into motion a rapid decline of the secondary manufacturing sector in the province. At the time, as you know, I was the president of BC Council Value Added Wood Processors. We had 8 associations, 800 companies, where today we probably have less than 20% of that volume.
Yeah.
Very unfortunate.
Yeah, and Mike DeYoung was the forest minister at the time that all of these fundamental changes were made to the Forest Act, the Forest Range Practices Act, that enabled a shift in the industry that the major corporations and licensees have been asking for some time in order to warrant investment in British Columbia. That was the argument they kept making. And in one speech, Mike DeYoung said, "You will not recognize the BC forest industry after we're done with it." And he was prophetic. I think if you look at the coast, there's one company that basically controls the entire coast. You're collapsed to about 4 companies technically in the interior. And even with the mountain pine beetle, how they approached the salvage of that, they bought timber back in order to make licenses available for smaller operators and independents, but they ended up giving those licenses back as salvage licenses to the major licensees, and even made matters worse for anybody getting access to that timber. And so we saw the complete eradication of value added, secondary manufacturers. It was a fundamental privatization of the land base and corporatization of the manufacturing that kept us locked into the old model, I would argue, of going to the market with whatever you could make in a dimension lumber product and hoping somebody wanted to buy it. And that's kind of where we're stuck.
So that then being said, Bob, and with all your background and experience, this has been very intense, both on the public side as well as your experience with the larger companies, medium-sized companies, and your experience as a mayor of a community that is broadly involved in lumber manufacturing and all of that, is saying, where do we go from here? Because the question is now, I believe there is no one that questions the fact that the industry is in transition, obviously because the annual albuquerque has gone provincially from as high at times during the uplift of adding more dead timber to it, from 80 million cubic meters annually to a predicted volume of around 40 to 45 million cubic meters, which means an industry that has too much capacity, not enough timber. And we have seen the devastation that it leaves between communities. Fort St. James is a good example of it, Mackenzie and a number of other communities, including your own, Quesnel, where there used to be 6, 7, 8 different mills, where there now is only one major company operating, and so the industry has to change. I still believe that there is a tremendous future in forestry in the province of British Columbia, It may take a smaller industry and it may change a direction of making different products for different markets. And it means also that we have to use the technology being used for manufacturing now, new products for new markets, means new equipment, new technology, robotics, and all of that we have to introduce and for us to change the industry. And no different than what happened in Sweden 3-4 years ago, where they virtually changed the industry from one model to a whole new one, where they virtually changed the industry. How do you see that in your opinion?
Yeah, so in the absence of any provincial or federal leadership, we actually initiated what we call our Future Forestry think tank here in Quesnel. And I think part of the problem, John, is that British Columbia has always approached forest renewal or forest revitalization or rethinking of forest at the provincial scale. And you can't get anywhere with that. You know, we've got different ecosystems, we have different histories, you've got different manufacturing capacity, different ownership structure. So what we said is, we think Quesnel is a pretty interesting microcosm and an area where you could actually think on a scale that's doable. You can get your arms around it. Plus, on the landscape side, the landscape west of the Fraser is completely blown out. It has the highest mountain pine beetle impact, had the largest landscape fire that British Columbia's ever had, 500,000 hectares in the Plateau Fire in 2017. But to the east of the Fraser, you have a pretty interesting, diverse ecosystem in there with some pretty interesting forests and still some real green timber. So on the landscape, the question's begged is, okay, so what do you do now? How do you bring that landscape back? East of the Fraser, how do you maintain robust ecosystems? West of the Fraser, how do you restore robust ecosystems that are not going to have the same disturbance regimes we're seeing just now? So that's an interesting, scalable question you can ask. At the same time, even though we only have West Fraser, we still have the most robust, concentrated manufacturing anywhere. We have 2 pulp mills, you know, the largest sawmill in the world on any given day, an MDF plant, a plywood plant, and CNC wood products as an independent, you know, filling in some gaps as they use different wood types. So on that side, we're asking the question exactly as you've indicated, where do we have to pivot into new markets? One, because the landscape is producing different products and fiber is the thing, not so much saw log. And 2, because the market's demanding different products. How do we resolve the plastics issue? How do we get into things like finding ways to make this new, you know, protective equipment and masks from paper products? We think you can solve climate change through the forest industry and get your petrochemical substitutes. So because we have those 2 things together, we are actually asking that question. And then your third piece sits on top of it. And that's, what's the human resource dynamic? What kinds of training programs do you have to build to be able to allow us to manage the land base differently and to allow us to produce different products? And we're working closely, like you do, we're working closely with the College of New Caledonia to develop new training programs.
Yeah, and then the other opportunity I believe that I've seen, Bob, in the 55 years that I've been here, is that you know, to see the communities working as close together in times of crisis. May have been 2017, 2018, when we had the fires and the communities pulled together through the leaders of community leaders, and the same now with the industry crises and restructuring. What I've seen is more and more communities pulling together, including yourself and other communities in Northern British Columbia. I think this is the opportunity where we have to make the case for Northern BC, the northern half of the province where most of the wealth is created, for building a center of excellence that pulls in the other communities, where we are addressing the issues of what should it look like, not only as it relates to the forest industry, but how do we develop the skill sets, how do we attract the capital, and in the entrepreneurship of a new industry, including the forest industry. And I believe we have to look at it right from the bottom up and saying everything is on the table to develop a new industry as we go forward from here, including how do we grow timber, because there is no place better than, in all the places that I've seen in the world, than BC interior in particular of growing a forest. No, there is no place like it anywhere, and that future and that potential is still there. And I'm a great believer in that, although the industry will be smaller, but it will be different, and I think there are still lots of opportunities.
And I think you're right. It is a collaborative and a cooperative effort. And, notwithstanding that Wes Fraser's had to do what it's had to do through that whole consolidation and so on, they are an active partner with us. They're a great community citizen for us, but they're also actively engaged in our rethinking of the industry at some of the highest levels. So we appreciate that. But the other piece in this is the role First Nations can play. And I think as we move on the tenure system and more First Nations have access to that land base and access to the timber and the fiber coming off, we are fully engaged. So our collaborative involves the First Nations leadership, our licensees, and our local forestry folks as well. So it's really a true collaborative process involving all the players who have to be at the table to make it work.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bob. And and as you know, I'm the longest serving director on the board of COFI, the Council of Forest Industry, and actually was elected the vice chair in February. And I believe that our companies like the Wes Frasers, the Canfor, and all the medium and larger size companies are well aware of the fact the industry is changing and working much closer with communities, not only communities here in the interior, but at the coast, as well as First Nations, to structure the new industries going forward. And so I'm extremely optimistic, that we will get through these challenges. Obviously, COVID-19 is the issues that we are dealing with right now, but I'm positive that also that again will pass at some point. In the meantime, since our time is full, have you got any other comments that you would like to make?
I think the thing that bothers me during this COVID piece is that forestry doesn't seem to be on the radar of particularly the federal government, but it's only nominally so on the provincial level. One of the arguments that I've made is as the industry has to adapt to pretty severe market conditions, you really need the leadership to come from government. Government needs to start painting a vision for an alternate future and starting to work with the partners to drive that. And quite frankly, that's the biggest piece I think is missing. There isn't that originality of thought. There isn't that visionary path forward coming from government, who in British Columbia has the largest stake in it because they're the largest landowner and it's their resource that we're trying to maximize in our communities.
Yeah, what has been encouraging to me is that, especially in the last number of months, that industry and government are stepping more up to the plate than they had before. And I heard there was some announcements made in terms of the potential deferral of stumpage cost that would be helpful. And we are all in this together. And communities, First Nations, and both local government, provincial government, and federal government. So I really appreciated my opportunity to interview you, and I thank you very much for being part of this.
Appreciate it, John, and good luck with the rest of the series.
Yeah, and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching us today, and we look forward to have you join us the next time.